Hello, my name is Ethan Swift. I'm one of 5 watershed or basin planners with the Agency of Natural Resources, Department of Environmental Conservation. Now I'm going to go through several non-regulatory approaches that support natural resources. Efforts to take care of a community's natural resources can come from neighbors, community groups, groups of landowners working together, or town government. They benefit from strong partnerships, and they can help get people talking and working together. These kinds of non-regulatory approaches may be preferable in many situations. I'll talk very generally in this next section about a few categories of non-regulatory tools and then give a few examples. The first category is what I call neighbor-to-neighbor activities. These types of projects include activities like water quality sampling, invasive species management, backyard forest stewardship, river cleanups, or planting trees to stabilize stream banks. The purpose of these is to connect people with the land. This can build support by helping people understand what's on their own land and by helping everybody else see how things connect across the community and at the landscape scale. The other purpose is to connect people together by celebrating that place. Building and celebrating a shared enjoyment of place is a very important part of figuring out together how best to take care of that place. They may be organized by conservation commissions, energy committees, watershed organizations, or even community service organizations like the Rotary or Scouts. These types of activities can be used to support most types of natural resources. You all are town officials, so you might wonder how this fits in with your work. The town plan sometimes includes actions related to education and outreach that fall into this category. Here's an example of a neighbor-to-neighbor effort that involved a town conservation commission and residents teaching each other, learning together, and celebrating a place in their community. Middletown Springs is in Rutland County and has a population of about 750 people. The town received a donation of 14 acres of land from the Sullivan family. The town's conservation commission was appointed to take care of this property and built trails and signs. To help fulfill the educational mission of the donation, the Conservation Commission organized monthly community walks which included storytelling, camping, and seasonal events like snowshoeing. It involved people of all ages. Volunteers led the walks and talks every month for about 6 years. They advertised in local papers, and the cost varied depending on what was being done. Oftentimes, like with camping, they would get food donations. Advertising in the local newspaper was one regular cost of the series of events. As for the time commitment, volunteers spent their personal time to prepare the monthly presentations. So what did this project accomplish? The walks engaged people of all ages. In addition, follow-up news reporting on the events meant that they reached even more people. It boosted community appreciation for conservation and for a special place in the town. It even ended up drawing in some tourists. Here are a few takeaways from the project that might help you if you're considering something similar. Keeping this going monthly required a strong volunteer base with multiple people committed to the project. The Conservation Commission headed it up. And one of the things that helped keep this going was that the goals of the Conservation Commission members coincided with the program's goals, so there was investment in keeping it going. Holding events consistently, even in bad weather, was important. A challenge was that the number of attendees varied from month to month. It was also hard to keep the program running as the children grew older. Long term, it was challenging to find volunteers who could sustain putting in the time needed. The next regulatory tool are tax programs. The current use program is an incentive to keep forest land and farmland productive and undeveloped. It taxes the land at its value for farming or forestry instead of the higher value that would be assessed at if it was developed. This reduces what landowners have to pay in property taxes, which makes it easier for landowners to keep large parcels intact and productive. In exchange for the lower property taxes, forest landowners are required to follow a forest management plan and keep land undeveloped. The state reimburses towns for the decrease in revenue from the lower assessments, so municipal tax rates aren't affected by having land in a town enrolled in the program, and the town doesn't lose money by having local land in the program. Local tax stabilization is similar. Towns are allowed to enter into agreements with property owners to fix property values or tax rates. This can be appealing for towns who want a local program rather than a state one, but towns aren't reimbursed for the difference in taxes. We don't have time to go into the details here, but you can find information in your resources packet. More information about this. Municipalities may wish to promote these programs by providing information about enrollment to landowners. This helps the town since keeping land undeveloped helps saves money. Undeveloped land doesn't require services like emergency response or road maintenance. Tax programs are useful for supporting farm and forest land and can have water quality benefits as well. Another non-regulatory strategy is land conservation, or a conservation easement. This is another way to help keep land in larger blocks instead of fragmented, which can support important uses for forest, habitat, wildlife corridors, agricultural land, and floodplain protection. This is a voluntary agreement between a landowner and a land trust or government agency that limits the type of or amount of development on a piece of land. Have any of you conserved your own land or know someone else who has? Conservation is voluntary, so ultimately it's up to the landowner, but towns can still provide information and support land conservation. Towns can promote available programs, can help fund conservation easements, and towns can also support larger land conservation projects. For example, by identifying land in a town that could be protected by the Forest Legacy Program and by writing letters of support. Towns can also donate easements to protect land or help find money for the legal fees associated with conservation easements. Towns can also hold conserved land, for example, such as a town forest. One thing I want to mention here again is that we have an aging population of landowners in Vermont. This is important since as people get older, land is often divided into parcels and given to children, which is not a bad thing, but planning ahead can help landowners think of alternatives to selling parcels for development, and towns can help provide resources for this. One additional tool that towns can take advantage of is Vermont's tactical basin planning efforts. In this example, the terms basin and watershed can be used interchangeably. The Vermont Basin Planning process provides a framework to implement high-priority restoration and protection projects within each basin over the course of each 5-year iterative cycle. First, it might help to clarify what a basin is. A basin or a watershed is like a bathtub. It's all the land that water flows across to drain to a common outlet. An example might be all the land that drains into the Winooski River and eventually flows into Lake Champlain. Each basin plan also becomes the implementation vehicle to address stressors that affect surface waters and may help address those priorities within the statewide surface water management strategy and implement priority actions in each TMDL or surface water restoration plan, and to implement key provisions and requirements under the Vermont Clean. Some of you may already have been involved in basin planning already. Basin plans are watershed-level plans. There are 15 major river basins in Vermont and 5 basin planners who work at the regional level. These plans start with science, relying on water quality monitoring and assessment information to identify which areas on the landscape need the most attention, whether it's an area that's eroding, a section of a stream that's polluted by sediment, etc. Basin planners then work with the regional planning commissions and other agencies and organizations to take these plans to communities and discuss water resources that are important to each town. Water resources can be anything from fishing, healthy functioning floodplains, and quality drinking water. Water resources are affected by many variables and can be assessed for municipal roads, flood resiliency and protection, culverts, fishing, swimming, just to give a couple of examples. Where there is overlap between community goals and what the assessments say, those projects are more likely to rise to the top in the basin plans. This increases the chance that the projects will get funding. So, by participating in the basin planning process, communities can see tangible benefits for the water resources they care about. Taking advantage of various water quality assessments, such as for stormwater, roads, and river corridors, is a great way to get started, and towns are eligible to receive money for these assessments. In some cases, participating in the Basin Plan and getting local priorities incorporated into the Basin Plan can also help towns get ahead of the curve when it comes to meeting requirements. For example, if a municipal project has been identified as a priority in a stormwater master plan, which is one type of assessment, then it will also be included in the relevant Basin Plan. This project is now listed as a priority for funding to address a water quality issue and can help the town meet its obligation to address stormwater under the Vermont Clean Water Act. This becomes a win-win for the town and for the surface water uses that we all rely on, such as for swimming, fishing, and boating. So, contact your local basin planner and find out more about how to get your town involved. I would also like to summarize other local approaches that can support natural resources protection. Conservation funds can be project-specific, like raising money to buy a parcel that's important to the town, or they can accumulate in a reserve fund over time. About 50 towns in Vermont have funded permanent conservation of land in the last decade. With town forests, towns can set aside land in town forests for recreation, timber management, wildlife management, and to protect the local water supply. Smart growth is a way to plan land use that focuses development in compact areas like our villages. This can take pressure off of undeveloped farm or forest land in order to provide more affordable housing and provide transportation options as examples. Natural resources within compact areas matter too. Trees help with stormwater and clean air. I want to mention another type of development that has the potential to affect natural resources, and that is energy development. With renewable energy, we can sometimes run into competing goals. Clean energy will help the environment in the long term, but where should it go so that it doesn't harm valuable natural resources? Town plans can't prohibit renewable energy from being developed, but they can include policies to guide appropriate locations for developing renewable energy. As of 2016, plans that meet certain standards can receive a determination from the Regional Planning Commission so that the plan policies are given more weight in the review process. The process for granting determination is being developed by the Department of Public Service. There are also solar ordinances, and I'll talk about those in the regulatory section. This next example shows how a town supported stewardship of land with a town forest and how it used and increased its conservation fund. Hartford has about 10,000 residents and has 5 villages, including White River Junction. The town has a 423-acre town forest that abuts a 142-acre town-owned wildlife refuge. The town established a conservation fund in 1991 and has used it for conservation and land management projects since. One of these projects is having a forest management plan for the town forest. The conservation fund receives an allocation from the town of $3,000 a year. It's separate from the general fund, so funds carry over from year to year. The fund was initially established for conservation purposes, according to the ballot item from the town meeting where it was approved. In addition, timber harvests from the town forest, which are based on the forest management plan, have contributed to the fund. There have been 2 harvests in the last 10 years. One brought in over $20,000, and this money also went into the conservation fund as an example of how land management can fund conservation work. The Conservation Commission develops a list of projects that are discussed with the Select Board and then incorporated into the annual budget. And again, the town receives an allocation of $3,000 a year. So how did this project help? The Conservation Fund helped pay for the management plan and timber harvest, and then money from that was invested back into natural resource projects like natural resource inventories. The Conservation Commission also sometimes uses the Conservation Fund to help landowners with the costs of conservation easements, and property owners have noted that this really helps. Here are a couple takeaways from the project that might help you if you are considering something similar. Find long-term, regular sources of support to keep the conservation fund growing. In this case, it is an annual allocation from the town and a periodic infusion of funds from timber sales. The other is that forest management and timber harvesting, can support conservation goals beyond the forest, in this case for natural resource inventories and additional conservation work. Another non-regulatory strategy that helps just about everything else, from education to public participation to choosing solutions, is to build broad partnerships. When it comes to getting things done, there are the usual suspects like the Conservation Commission, a watershed association, and local and state land trusts, but there are certainly other folks as well. What groups have you folks been partners with in conservation for outreach and education efforts in your town? Think about who are some of the more unconventional partners that you've worked with. This example comes from Enosburg Falls and involves many partners coming together to acquire a popular fishing and canoeing spot. Enosburg Falls is in the town of Enosburg in Franklin County. And what they did was, after a beloved fishing spot on the Missisquoi River was posted, the Vermont River Conservancy worked with partners to acquire it and maintain access. An Enosburg Falls community member, who is also an avid angler, approached the Vermont River Conservancy to look into how public river access might be reopened. The River Conservancy is a statewide nonprofit that protects shorelands for fishing and recreational access, for views, wildlife corridors, and more. The town agreed to be the long-term owner of the parcel. After that, the Vermont River Conservancy negotiated a purchase agreement, then began a fundraising campaign to acquire the property. They collaborated with the Vermont Housing and Conservation Board, the town's Conservation Fund, the Vermont Fish and Wildlife Department, the Fields Pond Foundation, and Habitat for Humanity to assemble the funding. Franklin Grand Isle Habitat for Humanity agreed to accept a donation of 2 one-acre lots on the land to develop affordable housing. In exchange, they paid for a survey and subdivision permits and contributed towards the purchase price. The cost and time of this was just over $189,000 to acquire the land, and it took 2 to 3 years to fundraise, negotiate with the property owner, and construct the river access. So how did the project help? The town of Enosburg Falls holds title to the land, while the Vermont River Conservancy and the Vermont Housing and Conservation Board co-hold a public access conservation easement. This ensures permanent public access. In the process, land for 2 affordable houses was donated to Habitat for Humanity for future construction. Land is often their single highest project cost, and this donation removed that barrier. The Northern Forest Canoe Trail built stone steps and tremendously improved fishing accessibility and site enjoyment with their summer intern crew. Here are a few project takeaways from the project that might help you if you are considering something similar. Though it's not surprising, it's always worth mentioning, collaboration and partnership were key, especially with such a short time frame for project completion. The project benefited from Vermont River Conservancy's coordination and leadership. Though it was challenging to meet the large fundraising goal in a short amount of time, the town is now developing a plan to add sidewalks to the property and create recreational paths along the riverlands for all. There are a few things to consider when thinking about non-regulatory approaches to natural resource conservation and protection. They may be easier to implement because they are usually voluntary and not required. They enhance peer-to-peer learning, which allows community members to connect and teach each other. It gets people involved and reinforces commitment to the community and the environment. And it can provide a track record of success. Many of these are established programs with a good record of success, which means there are existing resources to help you or your town's property owners do these types of activities or participate in these programs. On the other hand, efforts may be less comprehensive and they may not fully address the landscape scale. This could lead to a patchwork of resource protection, which might not achieve the results that you want for, say, long-term water quality. Efforts may not be as long-lasting, but on the other hand, if your work leads to more property conserved through current use or a property owner who becomes committed to maintaining a stream buffer, you've achieved some good buy-in, and that could be an investment that lasts. As I mentioned before, These are necessary first step for any other actions you may want to take, especially regulatory ones. And really, they're a no-lose type of action. Can you think of an action in this category that you've experienced or participated in that left a lasting impression for you? Give that some thought and jot down any impressions that you may have.